Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
Growing up, my grandpa's cabin was my sanctuary, a secluded retreat nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Unlike the bustle of city life, this rustic hideaway was a world apart, a cozy one-bedroom log cabin with a wraparound deck and a wood-burning stove. I spent summers fishing in the nearby creek, hiking the forest trails, and learning from my grandfather's infinite wisdom about nature and life. The cabin wasn't extravagant, but it was magical. When Grandpa passed away 2 years ago, he left the cabin to me in his will. It was his way of ensuring our shared memories lived on. I had every intention of preserving it just as he had left it, as a tribute to the man who taught me to value simplicity. Little did I know that this inheritance would thrust me into a battle of wills with an entitled neighbor, an intense property dispute, and a whirlwind of chaos I couldn't have imagined. The trouble began one crisp September morning. I had taken a few days off work to prepare the cabin for the upcoming winter season. Pulling into the gravel driveway in my battered Jeep Cherokee, I immediately noticed something odd. A brand new Range Rover parked squarely in front of the cabin. On the porch stood a woman I didn't recognize, peering through the windows as though she owned the place. "Can I help you?" I called out as I stepped out of my Jeep, my voice cutting through the quiet morning air. She turned, startled, then quickly masked her surprise with a sugary smile. She was in her mid-40s, with immaculate blonde hair and oversized sunglasses perched on her head. Everything about her screamed suburban queen bee, from her pastel cardigan to her designer loafers. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she cooed, her tone dripping with insincerity. "You must be the realtor. I've been waiting forever." I frowned. "Realtor? No, ma'am. I'm the owner of this cabin. What are you doing here?" Her smile vanished in an instant, replaced by an expression of disbelief and then indignation. "Owner? That's impossible. This cabin is supposed to be mine." "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake," I said firmly. "My grandfather left this cabin to me. I have all the paperwork to prove it." Her face flushed an alarming shade of red. "No, no, no," she spluttered, stamping her foot like an irate child. "The previous owner promised to sell it to me years ago. He said he'd hold it for me until I was ready to buy." Taking a deep breath, I tried to remain calm. "I don't know what my grandfather might have said to you, but he never mentioned any such agreement to me. Regardless, the cabin is mine now. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her expression darkened, her saccharine facade giving way to fury. "Do you know who I am? I am Karen Delaney, and I always get what I want. This cabin is practically mine, and I'll be damned if I let some inexperienced kid take it from me." "Ms. Delaney," I said evenly, suppressing the urge to laugh at her theatrics. "This conversation is over. Please leave before I'm forced to call the sheriff." "Oh, go right ahead," she sneered. "Call them. They'll see that I'm in the right." Determined to end the standoff, I pulled out my phone and dialed the local sheriff's office. The dispatcher on the other end sighed when I mentioned her name. "Karen Delaney? Yeah, we've dealt with her before. Sit tight. We'll send someone out." As I hung up, Karen smirked triumphantly. "See? Even the authorities know me. You're about to be very sorry, young man." I leaned against my Jeep, arms crossed, refusing to engage further. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's patrol car pulled up, and out stepped Deputy Reynolds, a no-nonsense officer in his late 50s with a reputation for patience and fairness. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Karen and me. Before I could respond, Karen launched into a tirade. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This young man is trying to steal my property. I've been planning to buy this cabin for years, and now he's claiming it belongs to him." Deputy Reynolds raised an eyebrow and turned to me. "What's your side of the story?" I explained the situation succinctly, mentioning my grandfather's will and the legal documents that established my ownership. The deputy nodded, his expression neutral but skeptical as he turned back to Karen. "Miss Delaney, do you have any proof that this property belongs to you?" Karen's indignation reached new heights. "I don't need proof. The previous owner promised it to me, and that's as good as a contract." "That's not how it works," Deputy Reynolds replied flatly. "Unless you have a legal agreement or deed, you have no claim to this property. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen's face twisted in rage. and she spat out a string of threats about lawsuits and connections to local officials. The deputy remained unfazed. "Ma'am, you have two choices. Leave voluntarily or leave in handcuffs. What'll it be?" Realizing she was out of options, Karen huffed dramatically and stomped back to her Range Rover. Before speeding off, she rolled down the window and shouted, "This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me." Deputy Reynolds turned to me with a weary smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood, kid. You might want to put up some security cameras." I thanked him, grateful for his assistance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's parting words were more than an idle threat. As I began unpacking my things, I couldn't help but wonder what she might do next. And so began the saga of Karen Delaney, a tale that would test my patience, my resolve, and my ability to keep a level head in the face of relentless absurdity. The following weekend, I returned to the cabin with a cautious optimism that Karen Delaney had perhaps found a new target for her obsessive antics. That hope, however, was short-lived. As I rounded the final curve of the gravel driveway, I was greeted by the sight of a bright yellow banner strung between two trees, emblazoned with the words, "Future Site of Delaney's Retreat." My jaw dropped. Beneath the sign, Karen's infamous Range Rover was parked, and beside it stood a garish folding table piled with brochures, balloons, and a large thermos of what appeared to be lemonade. Karen was in the middle of giving a spirited sales pitch to a couple in their 60s, both of whom looked distinctly uncomfortable. A small group of other would-be buyers stood nearby, holding what I presumed were brochures for this so-called retreat. I slammed my Jeep into park and stepped out, my heart pounding. "Karen, what do you think you're doing?" I demanded, striding toward her. She turned, her overly bright smile faltering for just a moment before she regained her composure. "Oh, it's you again. I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can help explain to these fine folks why this property is such a steal." "Are you out of your mind?" I shot back, gesturing to the banner and the gathering crowd. "This is private property. You have no right to be here, let alone trying to sell it to other people." Karen's smile turned icy. "Now let's not get dramatic. This is all perfectly legal. I'm simply conducting a preliminary interest survey to assess demand for the retreat I'm developing." "You don't own this land, Karen," I said, my voice rising. "You can't develop anything here because it doesn't belong to you." "That's a matter of perspective," she replied breezily, turning back to her bewildered audience. "As I was saying, this prime location will offer unparalleled views and rustic charm. Once it's fully renovated, you won't want to miss out on reserving your slice of paradise." One of the onlookers, an elderly man with a skeptical expression, raised his hand. Ma'am, do you have any proof that you actually own this property?" Karen's confidence wavered. "Proof? Well, of course I do. It's just a matter of time before all the paperwork is finalized." She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing. "That's where this young man comes in. He's been reluctant to cooperate, but I assure you everything will be sorted out soon." I shook my head in disbelief. "Listen, everyone, I'm the legal owner of this cabin and the surrounding property. Karen Delaney has no claim here whatsoever. If you've been promised anything, it's a lie." The murmuring crowd began to disperse, their interest turning to irritation. Karen's expression hardened as she realized her charade was crumbling. "Fine," she snapped, snatching the banner down with a dramatic flourish. "But mark my words, this isn't over. You may have the paperwork, but I have the vision, and vision always wins." "Karen, leave now," I said, my voice firm, "and don't come back. Next time, I'm pressing charges." She huffed, gathering her things in a flurry of indignation. As she drove away, her tires spat gravel and dust, a fitting metaphor for the mess she'd left behind. I spent the rest of the afternoon tearing down her makeshift operation, carefully disposing of the brochures and banners she'd scattered across the property. Though Karen was gone for now, a pit of unease settled in my stomach. I knew she wasn't done with her schemes. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, I resolved to take stronger action. Karen's antics were escalating, and I needed to protect the cabin from her delusional obsession. Security cameras were already on my to-do list, but now I began researching additional legal options. If Karen was willing to go this far, who knew what she might try next? Little did I know, her next move would make Delaney's retreat look like a harmless prank in comparison. The following weeks were unnervingly quiet, though I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Delaney was plotting something. True to form, her next move was as audacious as it was infuriating. I arrived at the cabin late one Friday evening, hoping for a peaceful weekend. As I turned into the driveway, my headlights illuminated a truly bizarre sight. The entire front lawn was covered with pink lawn flamingos, plastic garden gnomes, and tacky solar lights. A gaudy wooden sign had been hammered into the ground near the porch, declaring, "Karen's Cottage, coming soon." For a moment, I simply stared, dumbfounded by the sheer absurdity. Then, anger took over. Parking my Jeep, I grabbed a flashlight and marched toward the house. The porch lights were on, and as I climbed the steps, I noticed that the welcome mat had been replaced with one bearing Karen's name. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my stomach sank further. Karen had been here. The furniture had been rearranged, the curtains swapped out for flowery pink ones, and there was even a vase of fake roses sitting on the kitchen table. It was as if she'd decided to move in without bothering to ask. Fuming, I stepped back outside and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Reynolds answered on the first ring. "Evening, Jack. What's the trouble?" "Karen," I replied flatly. "She's been here again. The place looks like a bad flea market, and there's a sign out front claiming this is Karen's cottage." Deputy Reynolds sighed audibly. "Hang tight. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I began dismantling the chaos Karen had created. By the time Deputy Reynolds arrived, I'd removed most of the flamingos and torn down her ridiculous sign. "Well, she's certainly persistent," Reynolds remarked, surveying the scene. "Let's see if she left anything else behind." Together, we walked through the cabin, documenting the changes Karen had made. In the living room, we found a framed photo of Karen on the mantel, as though she'd claimed the place as her own. In the bedroom, she'd replaced the bedding with a frilly pink comforter that clashed horribly with the rustic wood walls. "This is beyond trespassing," I said, my frustration mounting. "She's trying to stake a claim on the place." "Don't worry, William," Reynolds said. "I'll make sure this gets added to the charges from her last stunt. You should also consider getting a restraining order. This is harassment, plain and simple." The deputy's words were a small comfort, but as I stood on the porch after he left, staring out at the dark woods, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Karen's antics were escalating, and I had no idea what lengths she might go to next. The answer came sooner than expected. The very next morning, as I was cleaning up the last of her decorations, a flatbed truck pulled into the driveway. A crew of workers jumped out, carrying tools and materials. "Morning," the foreman called out. "We're here to start on the new gazebo." "What?" I asked, completely baffled. "Who hired you?" The foreman consulted his clipboard. "A Ms. Karen Delaney. She said she owns the property and wanted a custom gazebo installed near the creek. She doesn't own this property," I said firmly. "She has no authority to authorize any construction here." The foreman frowned. "Well, she paid the deposit, but if this isn't her land, we're not getting involved in a legal mess. Sorry for the trouble." With that, the crew packed up and left. But my anger lingered. Karen's delusions were becoming more elaborate, and it was clear that she had no intention of backing down. By Monday, my lawyer had filed a restraining order against Karen, barring her from coming within 500 feet of the property. I also installed security cameras around the cabin, hoping to deter her from attempting anything further. For a while, it seemed to work, but Karen wasn't done. She never was. And her next move would make flamingos and fake roses look like child's play. The restraining order bought me a brief reprieve, but it didn't take long for Karen Delaney to find a way to circumvent the law. Her next stunt was the most outrageous yet, a spectacle that would drag the entire community into the chaos. It began on a crisp Saturday morning when I received a frantic call from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hanson. "Jack, you'd better get over to your property right away," she said, her voice trembling. "There's a gathering happening over there. It doesn't look right." Heart sinking, I grabbed my jacket and drove to the cabin as fast as I could. As I approached, I saw the unmistakable glow of multicolored lights through the trees. When I pulled into the driveway, I was met with a scene straight out of a bad dream. My front lawn had been transformed into a chaotic carnival. Inflatable castles, garish plastic flamingos, and a makeshift stage dominated the landscape. A large sign hung from the porch reading, "Karen's Kingdom." A crowd of at least 50 people was milling about, many of them wearing cheap crowns and holding balloons emblazoned with Karen's face. At the center of it all, standing atop the stage with a bedazzled microphone in hand, was Karen herself. She wore a glittering tiara and a sash that read, "Queen of Real Estate." I stepped out of my car, my jaw clenched. Karen spotted me immediately and waved as though we were old friends. "Welcome to the grand opening of Karen's Kingdom," she called out, her voice amplified by speakers set up on either side of the stage. "Feel free to join the festivities, Jack. It's your privilege to witness history in the making." I ignored her and dialed the sheriff's office. Deputy Reynolds picked up after the first ring. "It's Karen again," I said tightly. "She's hosting some kind of bizarre event on my property. I need you here now." "On our way," Reynolds replied, his tone weary but resolute. As I waited, Karen began addressing her subjects. "This land has been reclaimed in the name of Karen's Kingdom," she declared dramatically. "No more will we bow to false ownership or oppressive deeds. This is a land of opportunity where dreams become reality." The crowd cheered, though some looked uncertain, as if they'd stumbled into the wrong event. When Deputy Reynolds arrived with backup, their presence barely registered with Karen. She continued her monologue, gesturing grandly with a plastic scepter. The deputies began dispersing the crowd, explaining that they were trespassing on private property. Most people left without argument, though a few grumbled as they shuffled toward their cars. Karen, however, was not so easily deterred. "You can't silence the voice of the people," she shouted as the deputies approached the stage. "This land belongs to the kingdom now." Deputy Reynolds climbed onto the stage and faced her. "Ms. Delaney, you're in clear violation of the restraining order and several trespassing laws. Step down and come with us, or we'll have to remove you by force." Karen's face flushed with indignation. "How dare you speak to royalty that way?" she snapped. "I am the queen of this land, and I demand you vacate my kingdom immediately." Reynolds sighed and motioned to one of his deputies. Together they escorted a flailing, shrieking Karen off the stage. "You'll regret this," she screeched as they loaded her into the patrol car. "This isn't over. You'll all pay for defying Karen's kingdom." As the patrol car drove away, taking Karen to face yet another round of charges, I stood amidst the remnants of her kingdom and took a deep breath. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to process. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly to clean up the mess. With help from neighbors and friends, we dismantled the stage, deflated the bounce houses, and restored the cabin to its peaceful state. The community, though initially baffled by Karen's antics, rallied around me, offering support and solidarity. In the end, Karen's bizarre crusade solidified my connection to the cabin and the people around it. The ordeal reminded me of my grandfather's wisdom and resilience. No matter how challenging the circumstances, he always found a way to endure and protect what he loved. As for Karen, she faced multiple charges and a court-mandated evaluation of her mental health. The restraining order was extended indefinitely, and I've since installed an extensive security system to ensure she never tries something like this again. Sitting on the cabin's porch one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, I finally felt a sense of peace. This place, with all its memories and trials, was mine to protect and cherish. And no amount of Karen's madness could change that. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the ball to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.